Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on securing tomorrow, or maybe we should say securing today. I'm Simon G, BDM at EBS, and I'm joined by our key partner, Sasha Roshan from Connectwise, who's going to talk about the threat landscape, how a SOC can help us, and general cyber best practices. So before I hand over, we're recording this session and we'll also be uploading it onto our YouTube channel. So if I can ask you to keep your cameras off, stay unmuted. If you do have any questions during the session, which I'm sure you will do, if you want to pop them in the chat, and we'll either take them on throughout the presentation or we'll have a session at the end anyway. And without further ado, it's over to you, Sasha.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Simon. So as Simon mentioned, yes, securing tomorrow, talking about the threat landscape, the SOC advantages. So why is a SOC so important? And then some cybersecurity best practices. So the agenda I want to focus on today really is, first of all, talking about the threat landscape. Okay, what's currently going on out there? What's, the most threatening thing that we're seeing SMBs really suffer with? Things like different kind of viruses, ransomware, Trojans, etc. From there, what does good cybersecurity look like? Okay, so we talk about cybersecurity frameworks. We're talking about what are those best practices that we should all be adopting one way or another. And then a good heavy subject is going to be what is a SOC team, the value behind the people from the technology, and the benefits of being able to use a team such as a SOC. And then talking about layered security, so not relying only on one piece of technology, but multiple pieces of technologies. In case one fails, one doesn't detect it, we have a higher chance to detect that original threat with another technology. And then finally, we have some time for any Q&A from there. So without further ado, let's start with the threat landscape. So it comes at no surprise, especially with my experience as well, that ransomware is on the rise. So if we look at the statistics, every year we are seeing pretty much an increase of ransomware and SMBs being targeted for ransom. So why is ransomware on the rise? Because that's the quickest way from a bad actor perspective to try and get some sort of money out of an organization. Okay, so we're seeing more organizations have business email compromises, etc., which is pretty normal to be able to start an attack. But the end goal of what's happening is some sort of ransom where they'll go ahead and mass encrypt all the devices and make sure that business can't operate without the data that has been held ransom. And then from there, what's going on? They're going to go hold the data for ransom, make sure that, hey, if you don't pay, we will release this out in the dark web, or we just won't give it back to you and you won't be able to function without it. So we see more organizations, and as you can see, as the years go on from 2018 to 2023, a gradual increase with ransomware throughout the years. And really what this is happening is on the news, we are seeing giant organizations, enterprise level organizations suffer with these particular attacks. Now, that does not mean that these really wealthy organizations don't have the correct technology. It may be the lack of people behind the technology, which is why we're going to be talking about the SOC team today, the Security Operations Center. We're going to be talking about why there's a value add with having a team, a 24/7 team behind the correct technology, and then from there making sure that they have the correct process as well. And what we're really trying to push or avoid, should we say, is getting your name on that list, okay? Your name on the breach list, because there is a national breach list or an international breach list where we can actually see which organizations have been breached and how much have they been fined due to GDPR or other legislation compliance elements. So how are businesses impacted with
I think, can I just come in there very quickly as well, Sasha? And I think there's obviously a big highlight, and what you see on the press is, if you like, the very large, well-known businesses. And I think you have to take the media into context there and say, well, the media are not going to report on a 50-user site necessarily. They're going to report on the ones that we are well-known. And I think one thing that is very, very clear and an important point put across here is this affects everybody. SMB to enterprise, everybody is affected. Yes. It's just that it's not as well media well known.
That is correct. I'll give you an example. British Airways were fined over 20 million for a data breach. Of course, because British Airways are a well-known, respectable company that pretty much everyone has used at one time of one part of their lives to be able to cross over the world. Because of their weight within their name, they've now made the news. Because it was a 20 million fine, they've now made the news. Of course, with SMBs, and here's the scary part with SMBs, if you've been breached, there's a chance that you may not recover. Okay, that's why it's so important to be able to have the correct technology, people, and process implemented in order to be able to protect yourselves, not making media, let's say, if you do get to that moment, but as well as that, not be able to have to go and suffer from reputational type of damage and legislation fines as well. So very good point. So how are businesses impacted? When we talk about ransomware, the average ransomware dwell time is around 21 days. Now, some people may be thinking that's not too long. I've heard that it could be in the hundreds of days. You are correct. Ransomware is designed to be quick and execute quickly as well. It's not there to dwell too long and try to just collect unnecessary information. As soon as it has the chance to go ahead and execute, it will then go ahead and do that. Because its whole idea, the whole goal of ransomware is to go ahead and be there, mass encrypt, take the data, and make it unusable for you. Okay. The longer it stays on your network, there's a higher chance it could be detected. Okay. There's a higher chance that it could be an indicator of compromise. So that's why ransomware dwell time is relatively low. And if anything, it's getting lower because it's now with the technology that bad actors are using, they need less time to go ahead and execute the malicious code that they need to go ahead and start mass encrypting. The ransoms really that we see is around 10% of annual revenue for that organization. Okay, so that's the average of what they would charge to release the keys for you to be able to start going ahead and unlocking the data and start being able to use the data as well. Now, the average cost of recovery, and this isn't just for SMBs as well, this is globally, is around 1.6 million pounds. Okay. Now, I've seen something as low as £50 for them to be able to unlock their data because they know the size of the organization. It's just a way of being able to go ahead and say, hey, we have your data. We could do this again if we needed to. All we ask you for is £50. And I've seen as large as a few hundreds of thousands of pounds just to be able to go ahead and release that data. So it does vary on the organization size. The average downtime of what happens when a ransomware occurs is 21 days. Okay, so that means that you're not only suffering from not being able to continue business for 21 days until you have your data, but also the reputational type of data damage, should I say. So I'll give you an example. If you was not able to log into your service to be able to use, let's say, if it was Amazon, for example, you wasn't able to use Amazon for around 30 days, there is a good chance you would then use a competitor's site in order to purchase whatever you needed to purchase from there. Okay, that's the sort of damage that could happen. And then making sure that, hey, I need to buy something. I don't think I'm going to go to Amazon this time. I think I'm going to go to another organization, another competitor to be able to use their services because that site was down for quite a long time. I'm not too trustworthy about that. So that's the sort of reputation damage that happens and the average downtime on average when there's a ransom. And then you have legislations and fines. So if there was personal data that was compromised, that was stolen, you could get a chance from a GDPR compliance perspective. It would be classified as a breach, and then there would be fines that may need to be paid. It could be 4% of your annual revenue. It could be 2% depending on how severe that damage was. And then insurance, cyber insurance. Okay, cyber insurance are designed to make sure that unless you have everything to the T with what we are asking for from a contract perspective, you could void your insurance, and they could make sure that, hey, we're not going to pay this out because you didn't have everything up to date. You didn't have the EDR technology that we recommended that you should use as a minimum. You know, you may still be using antivirus, which we know is not as sophisticated as an EDR. So it's making sure that do you have the correct technologies and people in place as well as the processes? If not, you could be under a serious situation with your cyber insurance company as well.
I think can I just also jump in there and I think that the insurance is a really important one because don't get me wrong, it's still very important to have your insurances in place. What insurance can't do is if there's been any detriment to data and they can't get your data back. So yes, having and again, we're not going to talk solutions, but you know, yes, you might have backups in place. Ultimately, will those backups be corrupt? And there's a long discussion there. But as much as insurance is a good thing, it cannot get your data back.
That is
I
correct.
think
You're
that's a
absolutely
really
right. Yeah,
important point to make here.
not
I,
their
I do have a
responsibility.
I
Yeah.
do have a question that's popped up as well, which is probably, and it's about the dwell time. Do you want to explain what dwell time is?
Yes. So it's how long that piece of malware or bad actor or hacker is actually within your network. Okay. So as I mentioned, 21 days on average for ransomware. Okay, but again, it's designed to be very short, very snappy, and execute as soon as possible. If we have another piece of malware which is designed to just collect data for reconnaissance, it could be there for up to a year even. Okay, so the dwell time does change depending on what that bad actor is trying to do. Are they actually trying to go ahead and quickly do something malicious, or are they trying to just go ahead and just try to get some reconnaissance information gathering for attack later down the line? All right. So that's why it's important to actually understand that you do have different layers. So we're not just talking about protecting your endpoints, but protecting your network as well with things such as a SIEM solution to be able to look out for anything that's suspicious, because that dwell time, that piece of malware, that bad actor, may not just go on the endpoints or may even not even touch the endpoints, but it may be going on your, let's say, 365 accounts, okay, doing some impossible travel, right? So all of those things is dwell time. All of those things can be triggered as an indicator of compromise. Great question. Are there any more before we move on to the next?
I do have another one. So it's nice that we've got the questions. If there's I guess this is based on ransom. If you ask for money to get out of ransomware, should we pay the ransom?
Great question.
And there's a second part to this. I'll let you answer the first one.
Okay, all right. So that is a great question, and I did a video of this not too long ago. Annoyingly, there's no yes or no, and I'll tell you why. Okay, it's dependent on the business. Personally, you shouldn't really pay the ransom because you're just, if anything, just feeding the beast, right? So they paid the ransom, we're going to do this to another organization because this organization paid the ransom. What we're trying to avoid is going ahead and promoting that. However, if the data is so important for that organization and is actually worth more than what the ransom is, you will find some organizations still pay for that, okay? Because they say, okay, it's only this much. However, the actual data that they're holding is worth 5, 10, 20 times more than what they're asking. I'm just going to pay that for the chance to be able to continue business operations without further disruption, okay? The risk is, if they do release the data, there is no guarantee that they will not put that on the dark web and start selling that data. Okay, so there's a risk. So you really need to factor in the risk compared to reward. Do you want to pay the ransom and then they may not even give you the key back, or pay the ransom and you do get your data back, but they still have a copy of the data and they've still sold it to the dark web, or they've uploaded it to the dark web to be sold? Okay. So again, it's not a yes or no answer. I would always recommend to avoid it. And the best way to avoid it is risk mitigation by going ahead and having the correct people, process, and technology to avoid being in this situation at the first time. But my recommendation is to consult a professional, an IR team, okay, and actually understand what's the best next step for this particular stage. So unfortunately, not a yes or no answer. It does depend, but we have professionals within Connectwise, within your team as well, to be able to go ahead with EBS to make sure that that doesn't happen.
100%. Yeah, and I think the big word that you said, if. So there is some people will, you pay your money if you like, and they will release it. I have experienced that, and I've also known when you've paid your money and they haven't. But that bigger picture as well, as you've absolutely said, that is not the end of it necessarily. And I think that there was another part of that question, actually. Are you safe if you pay the ransom? So I think that hopefully that's answered that.
Yeah.
Where ultimately, no,
no.
is the reality.
No, you are not. There's no guarantee that they haven't destroyed it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Excellent. Good question. So, what does good look like? What does good cybersecurity look like? And I really want to focus on a cybersecurity framework, which is provided by the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. That's what it stands for, a bit of a mouthful, but a fantastic organization that is providing a cybersecurity framework that covers all the elements, kind of like a life cycle, from identifying a threat all the way down to recovering as well. So I'm going to go through this, and if you're not familiar with cybersecurity frameworks, there's some which are going to be such as the ISO 27001, PCI DSS, which focuses on credit cards as well. So there are many different type of frameworks. So if we go ahead and look at identifying. Okay, so we are going to now identify our risk. We're going to identify our assets, our computers, our servers, our intellectual property, etc. All of these elements, which we need to make sure that, hey, this is something which is the company owns, it's sensitive. We want to make sure that we protect that data. We can't protect what we don't know. And that's a very powerful phrase. Okay, so it's making sure that you do your risk assessments, you identify assessments as well. And then from there, you want to make sure that you protect what you've identified. Okay, what's important for the organization? As I mentioned, people, technology, intellectual property, all of those elements. Okay, so from there, that's when you start implementing things like your EDR technology. Okay, just the EDR technology alone, that's considered the protection stage. Education, we're talking about security awareness. Okay, so things like your ISO 27001, they're looking at things like your security awareness. You are continuously promoting a good cybersecurity with security awareness training as well. So with detect, we're going to continuously monitor that. Okay, so we have our technology, we have our EDR solution. We're now going to start going ahead and continuously detecting if there's any, or monitoring to see if there's any detection of compromise, if there's any malicious behavior within that endpoint. So with detection and respond, that's really where the SOC team lives. Okay, you have your technology here and you have your people here as well. So with respond, when we detect a threat, when we detect something that's malicious, we need to respond to it. Do we need to kill the process? Do we need to quarantine the file? Do we need to go ahead and isolate the device as well if we see something that's potentially a live attack? Okay. Within the inventory of the SOC, there's a lot of things that they can be able to do. And here's the great thing about that. The SOC are 24/7, right? So irrespective if it happens 1 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, there is a team that's going to be able to monitor and detect and finally respond to those threats. And then finally, if something does go wrong, something you've already mentioned it, if data's been corrupted, if data's been missing, stolen, whatever it is, this is where you have to have the correct technology in place to make sure that you've already taken the backups. Okay, we're talking about SaaS backups, monitoring your going ahead and taking backups of your 365, your Entra ID, also your endpoints. Okay, so there's some EDR technologies out there that are sophisticated enough that will go ahead and automatically roll back because they're taking snapshots of your particular machines if there's ransomware that's happened. Okay, it can automatically roll back to the last known good state and actually identify where that malicious file was when it happened. Okay, and that's going to allow the SOC team to be able to respond from there.
And I think just to jump in there as well, Sasha, that obviously the way that we work, so from an EBS and a Connectwise perspective, we're obviously working for our clients and in terms of saying, right, well, these are the devices, the endpoints, etc., that are, as you put, really that what require protecting. They're the risk elements, if you like. The detection. So to a certain extent, if I want to talk in old school money, if like, yes, we'd have an antivirus solution, would notice activity to a certain extent. This is taking it to another level. And I think the big thing there is that 24/7 pitch, that if it's 3 a.m. UK time, for example, those are still, potentially your riskier time from an attack.
Correct.
And therefore there is still activity happening then, and we need to be, and with Connectwise and the SOC, that's when we're going to basically identify and deal with that. I'm going to say immediately for the right context of term there, and do what's necessary. And sometimes that might prove painful when you return to work at 8 a.m. or whatever it may be, that the decision was actually the device needs to be taken off of the network, as an example. It's about securing the entire site. And I think that's the focus of this. Okay, it may not be as dramatic as that, but that's what this is all about, essentially.
Yep, that is correct. I completely agree with you there. As I like to say when I'm doing demonstrations to partners and customers, it's important to know that there was a team that reviewed it. There was an executive decision to say that, hey, if we leave this device online any further, the risk of this lateral movement to occur or the attack to cause more damage dramatically increases. So there will be a report, there will be an executive decision within the SOC team, and of course EBS to make sure that, hey, we've done that for the right reasons and here's the evidence. Okay, so everything is documented from our side as well. So I want to break this down even further because we get customers from all different angles. We have technical people, we have people who are from an executive position as well. I want to really give everyone a chance to be able to understand when we're talking about the right home security. Okay, so we talked about identify all the way down to recover. Okay, with the NIST, there is another layer called governance, okay, which was actually in the middle of that life cycle. And it's a little bit hard sometimes for someone who's never seen NIST before to actually understand the concept. So I've broken that down a little bit more over here. So this is relating to the right home security. Everyone here has a home, okay, of some sort, so that we can actually understand, you know, from identifying something. So we want to identify what is worth protecting. We're talking about our families, our children's, our electronic sensitive documentation, such as our passports, okay. From there, we need to protect what's in our house, which is valuable. Doors, windows, okay. You make sure you have the correct frame. There's no kind of hole within the wall, okay. You have your locks. You have your yard signs to deterrent people. And then from there, you have your education. So I'm letting know my children, okay, for example, going ahead and saying, hey, don't go ahead and open doors for strangers. Allow me to have a look first, and then I'll say if it's okay, right? And then from there, detect and respond. So with detection, we have alarms. We have motion sensors. So when I've left the house, I know if something's moved within the house, which could be, again, a bad actor with dwell time, lateral movement, whatever you can use as an example. If something moves, okay, then there's going to be an alarm. And I'm going to see that on my phone, okay? Maybe I have a security system as well, where actually a security guard comes and has a look, right? So that allows you to leak into the response stage. With that, with response, I have a dog. Okay, so I know if someone that's coming into the house or trying to coming into the house, I know the dog's going to go ahead and not only try to deterrent, but also go ahead and bite. All right, so that's a respond capability. We have the police. You may be lucky to have nunchucks as well in the house if you're that lucky. And then recovery, you have things like your home insurance. Okay, if something's damaged, you can repair it. Cleaning, repairs, of anything like that. Now, governance. Okay. House rules, all right? Making sure that we don't leave the doors open, making sure that we learn from our mistakes, so that we actually write this down that, hey, guys, make sure this doesn't happen again. This is what happened. You know, we can see that this is, you know, we've left the doors unlocked and someone was able to get in, okay? Making sure that we educate the team and documenting, making sure that when we purchase something, we do our due diligence. We research on the product. Is it recommended? Is it not recommended? Now, I'm going to move over to a technical perspective. Now, with identification, again, critical asset, servers, people, intellectual property, employee data anyway. So, of course, if that's going to be taken away from a breach, that's been stolen, that's classified as a breach under GDPR. So we need to make sure that that's protected, okay? And then from there, with the protection, we have our firewalls, we have our EDRs, endpoint detection and response, awareness training. With detection and response, again, we have our EDR. So I'm falling within EDR with 3 different layers. Okay, so that's why an EDR is very popular, especially with, you know, what I do from demonstrations. An EDR falls into many layers within the NIST cybersecurity framework. Okay, so detecting, we use our EDR, as well as our MDR. Okay, with our SOC, we have our SIEM solution. With respond, incident response, threat analysis, we can go ahead and isolate a device if we need to. As I mentioned, we can go ahead and roll back if we need to as well. Recovery, all right, backing up our data. SaaS backup, for example, backing up our servers, making sure that from a cybersecurity perspective, that we have the IR team that will make those decisions for you, what needs to be recovered, what doesn't need to be recovered, okay? As you know, from a recovery perspective, you don't recover absolutely everything the first time. You normally, and should do, recover the most critical assets within the organizations in order for the primary function of the organization to continue, okay? And then you start going ahead and backing up the small elements from there. And then governance, security policies, okay, documentation, leadership, all of these fall under the governance section. As I mentioned, okay, we're talking about going ahead and making sure that things are in place and things are going ahead and being communicated with the team as well. So that is a very kind of fundamental breakdown of the NIST cybersecurity framework, and hopefully everyone, you know, gets a good understanding of this, because it does break it down to different layers. I want to see if there's any questions before I move into
There is
SOC.
one.
Yep.
So obviously you've mentioned EDR. Do we need EDR and an antivirus solution?
Great question. So typically an EDR solution is an upgrade to an antivirus. Okay. There is no need to have both of them running at the same time. So let me put this into perspective. An antivirus is going to be sitting there and it's going to be looking at, let's say, for example, different sorts of hashes that are coming into the actual device, okay, and querying it with a database, saying, okay, this is the file. I'm going to go ahead and query that with the database. Make sure if I've seen this before, is it well known? Is it, let's say, benign, or if I've never seen it before? If it's never been seen before, it will then go ahead and possibly allow that to go through. Okay, an EDR solution, which does exactly what the antivirus doing, plus behavioral analysis, machine learning, and incorporated with artificial intelligence as well, will go ahead and actually see, okay, I've seen that before. I know it's malicious. I'm going to immediately block that. I've never seen this before, but however, this particular file is doing something which is a bit suspicious, and I'm going to kill the process. So as you can see, it completely overlaps the antivirus and plus provides many more benefits as well. Okay, so you do not need to use an antivirus adjacent to an EDR. However, they can run together for whatever reason the end customer may want to do that. Just make sure you whitelist them. Otherwise, they both may think that they're threats because of the way they both act. Okay, so throw away your antivirus and introduce the EDR because that's a complete replacement for an antivirus.
Yeah, I think what we would always kind of term it, just to add that in simple terms, it's again, I don't want to call it next generation, but to a certain it is next generation antivirus.
It is.
I think that's probably a simple way of putting that across.
Antivirus on steroids, I normally like to say. But yeah, that's a good concept. Yeah, there's no need, and for many reasons, you shouldn't be using an antivirus. As for the things that I've just mentioned, not being able to pick up zero-day vulnerabilities, fileless attacks, and EDR will be able to do that with its behavior analysis. Great question. Now, if we're moving on to the core elements of today's topic, which is what is a SOC, okay, the people behind the technology, I want to talk about some benefits, okay? So with an EDR alone, it's going to be your responsibility, okay, as in the end customer, to go ahead and monitor that themselves. Here's the issue. As you mentioned, Simon, if something happens 3 o'clock in the morning, you need to make sure there is somebody there to be able to go ahead and pick up that. The first 15 to 20 minutes of an attack is the most crucial, okay? Those are the statistics. So if something does happen and you've left it from 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning all the way down to the next business day, and God forbid that is a Friday, Friday night that something has happened, 11 o'clock at night, and then your next business day is Monday, 9 o'clock in the morning, that bad actor has had 2 full days to go ahead and mess around with whatever he or she needs to do. So with that, with a SOC team, it provides 24/7 monitoring. Okay, so irrespective of what time, what day, even Christmas Day, they are monitoring that for you and they are responding on your behalf as well. Okay, and that's what EBS is providing over here, a 24/7 managed service for you to be able to be rest assured if something does occur outside of business hours or even during business hours. So you're not needing to hire the staff. EBS will sort that for, will be able to sort that out for you already. With Connectwise's SOC team, okay, be able to make sure that those two teams will work together, provide that 24/7 monitoring, a reduction of MTDD and MTTR, which is mean time to detect a threat and mean time to respond. And our statistics at the moment is around 25 minutes of when we find something suspicious and alert a threat. Within 25 minutes, we've responded to it, okay? And we've worked with your partner, being your MSP, to go ahead and remove that or figure out next steps from there, okay? False positives of the statistics that I have is over 90% of alerts that come into EDR solutions or antivirus solutions are false positives. So you're saving a lot of time by utilizing a SOC team to do all of that for you, effectively do all the hard work of actually filtering down, making sure, is this a real threat? Or is this just noise that we need to go ahead and deal with and remove? Okay, do we need to whitelist this? The SOC team will make those decisions for you. Okay, you can get reports of what the SOC team have done. That is fine. All right. You then have your threat hunting because you've got the correct talent behind the technology now with the SOC team. you have the different sort of people behind that. The cyber research unit, okay, which are dedicated for MSPs and SMBs, looking for threats, okay, going ahead in the back end, looking for any threats that may have occurred from another organization, and then working with the SOC team to go ahead and understand, hey, just be cautious. We've understood that this is a new vulnerability. We just want to let our partners know what's going on, okay? It's that sort of threat hunting, that sort of threat intelligence that we provide within the SOC.
I think that kind of lends it. So I think again a question has popped up here, and it's about how do I translate this? I think what it's saying is how do we, you know, between EBS and Connectwise, keep up to date from that SOC perspective? You know, it's an evolving world of compromises in it, I guess, is the question. So how do we keep up to date?
Okay,
making sure we protect.
As in keeping up to date with the latest threats which are happening out there?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, great question. Again, the cyber research unit, okay, that is the team that is knowledge sharing, not only what they found, but also gathering information from other communities of what's been going on out there, okay? So that's how the SOC team are able to keep updated with not only that, with their own certifications as well. So the SOC team, and here's the great thing about this, if with the correct technologies in place, irrespective of whatever we use from a Connectwise perspective, if we see one of our partners suffering from an attack from this location, and 2 days, one of your customers are suffering from the same attack, we've already noticed what happened with that particular customer, okay? So we have that internal threat intelligence and that internal information already documented from our side. So we've seen the exact same behavior happen within your organization. We know exactly how to respond to that. If it's something which is net new, we would update our cyber research units, okay? Or possibly there's something that we've never seen before and we need a little bit more help. That's when we may need to get the cyber research unit involved. Say, hey, this is a new threat. We have no idea what's going on with this. Can you give us a little bit more help? The SOC team are over 200 people. It's a huge amount of resources, which is actually my next point over here. A huge amount of resources which are developed with that, with multiple threat intelligence feeds, which are coming in from the cyber research unit, that can update us if there's something which is net new, such as a zero-day vulnerability, maybe something that we've never seen before, okay, which is a zero-day vulnerability. We can be able to keep up with the latest trends with that. The cyber research unit and Connectwise are industry-led for MSPs and SMBs, okay? So there are organizations that actually rely on us with our threat intelligence to be able to keep themselves up to date, which is exactly what you're doing, okay, from a partner perspective. So we will make sure that if there's anything that we see, we will go ahead and broadcast that when necessary, okay? With that, the scalability and the flexibility within our SOC team, okay? We have the largest SOC team globally dedicated for MSPs and SMBs, okay? There's no other organization that has the dedication with their threat intelligence and their team and the people that are dedicated within those particular realms. So that allows you to be able to be more protected, have less risk as well, rather than having a team that may be focused from an enterprise level only, but not really knowing what's happening from an SMB level, because a threat that happens from an enterprise level is very different to a threat that happens from an SMB level, okay, for good reasons. And with that, a SOC team provides you to maintain compliance. I'll give you an example. I mentioned PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. That's talking about credit card, when you're holding credit card information of clients, okay? They specifically say you need continuous monitoring, okay? So their wording makes it a little bit difficult to say, yes, all right, yeah, we have a SOC team, but are they continuously monitoring? Is it only business hours or is it actually 24/7? Because 24/7 is for continuous monitoring. But if something does happen at 2 o'clock in the morning, but you didn't have the team that was there, you may have just breached compliance from that because you didn't have the continuous element, which is why a lot of end customers partner up with organizations like yourself, Simon, to be able to provide that continuous monitoring, okay? Because they know they don't need to continuously hire new, let's say, security analysts, because they are very expensive to maintain and very expensive to employ as well, but they'll go ahead and outsource that. So they could be able to make sure that if only something that is absolutely critical, then the end customer is informed of that. Okay, so they see less noise dramatically from that.
I think just to really jump on that, and that's a really good point to make. You know, I think one of the things that we don't want to do, this does create, shall I say, a lot of noise. This will not be something, unless you really want it to be, something that's shared at end use level. This is about controlling it so we can source out and essentially we take control of that.
Yes, absolutely.
And
And I've
only
got
when necessary do we feel that where it needs to be shared.
correct. Yeah. And that's the flow we like to follow as well, because we want to really try to remove the pressure, the noise from the end customers, because that's normally their technical and business pain. That they come up to us and say, hey guys, this is a little bit too much that we're handling. We need some help. That's where they get involved. And they say, okay, by the way, we need to be able to reduce that noise. How do we do that? We partner up with someone like EBS. Now, just conscious of time, but just making sure that we gather everything as well. So the people behind the technology. Okay, so I've got some references, some quotes from these, really industry-led organizations. So Cisco, they've said that companies with SOCs reported a 50% increase in their ability to detect and respond to advanced persistent threats. Okay, so those are threats which keep on coming back. That you kill the process and automatically comes back again. Those are APTs compared to those without. Now, SANS, organizations with a SOC have reported a 50% reduction in mean time to detect and mean time to respond. We talked about that earlier, compared to organizations without SOCs. Now, finally, IBM, okay? Everyone knows IBM from a technological perspective. Organizations with a SOC team can reduce their dwell time by 50 to 60%. And IBM reports average dwell time of keeping undetected is 200 plus days. We talked about 21 days, and Simon, you had a very good question about that as well. 21 days for ransomware, but if someone wanted to continuously be undetected, as they can see, keeping undetected, they can go as far as up to 200 plus days. And I've seen longer as well with some of my partner conversations. All right. So they're specifically trying to keep under the radar. Whereas ransomware, they're not specifically trying to have that much of a long period. They just need to get what they need and then have the ransom from there. Okay. So what will we do, okay, as a partnership? So you have your EDR technology. So we're talking about this particular technology with protection. Okay, that's going to add your layer of protection by having the technology. With detection, we have our SOC team. Okay, if there's a threat that happens on your endpoint, the technology will be able to detect that. Our SOC team will be informed of that within their ticketing system, and they will go ahead and triage, react, and respond when necessary. We will analyze it as well. And as I mentioned, the SOC team that we are using from a Connectwise and EBS perspective, and meantime of response is around 25 minutes. Right, we're going to go ahead and identify, we're going to go react, respond, triage, and everything that needs to be done, and then finally work with EBS whenever needed to escalate further. Here's the great thing. Before an end customer is actually informed and involved, there's two layers which have already looked at that. The SOC team, okay, will actually go ahead and let's say there's a live attack. Let's say there's a possibility that that threat could actually laterally move into another device. We will go ahead, if needed, we can isolate the device. We can go ahead and make sure that, hey, we've isolated the device. However, we're going to inform our partner that, by the way, we've actually isolated this device, but we recommend you to also check X, Y, Z. Of course, your MSP already has the capabilities of going into your devices, other sort of infrastructure that you may have. So by the time it actually gets to you, if it gets to you, it's around really 1 in 100 that an alert might actually get to you, just informing you of what's been done, or actually informing you, hey, we need some more help and we need to get access to X, Y, Z. Okay, those are normally the statistics I see, but around 95% of the alerts are handled from this perspective, and the rest we will be working with EBS. And if there's anything that needs to be escalated further, would go to the end customer. Now, just imagine if you didn't have that, you'll be dealing with 100% of the alerts, okay, and the noise, and dealing with those particular alerts, should we say. There are two T's that I normally deal with: time and talent. Okay, if you don't have the time, or maybe if you do have the time to deal with all those alerts every day, then sure, that's great. But we see a lot of organizations that don't have the time to spend an hour a day to deal with alerts, because if you really think about it, at the end of the week, that's 5 hours of your working your working hours that you could be spending doing more important tasks, for example. That's why they outsource. But hey, if you have the time, do you have the talent? Okay, and again, if you do have the time, there's a higher chance you don't have the talent. Okay, again, security professionals are going to be able to have experience and look after your particular infrastructure and actually know the difference between an actual attack or a threat compared to something that isn't. And the worst thing you can do is not have enough experience and actually let a file to go through because you believe it's benign. However, it was an actual, let's say, Trojan, for example, and it's just gone under the radar, and you were none the wiser, and you've just allowed a threat to get into the network, which will be classified as a breach if it ends up executing. Okay, so time and talent is very important. I want to focus on the 3 pillars of cybersecurity: technology, people, process. Technology at this stage will be this, okay? Your EDR technology. Listen, nothing's 100% guaranteed in cybersecurity. I think we all understand that and respect that. If the technology was not able to stop this particular breach from happening, at that stage, you start relying less on the technology. And then you start relying more on the people. And the people, for the end customer perspective, will be this team, okay? So those are the people, if something does go drastically wrong, if you need help, so it's not always us detecting something, maybe you found something suspicious that you want a little bit more help on, those are the people that you'll be reaching out to. Now, of course, the flow of communication will be from end customer to partner, and then this is an extension of EBS for them to be able to work with. With process, you have your business contingency plans, IR plans, okay, if something does go drastically wrong. So your process doesn't normally change. We actually look out for those particular elements of what happens at a worst case scenario. So when something does happen, we know the process of what needs to be done, okay? Internally, we follow a process. The MSP follows a process, and of course, the end customer will have a process as well. If not, then we will share that process of what needs to be done if a breach or an attack happens from your side. Are there any questions, Simon, or are we able to move into, I believe it's the last chapter? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, no, carry on. There's no further questions at this stage.
Oh, I see. Now, I just want to talk about defense in depth. And what I'm really trying to emphasize at this point is not having one technology, okay? Or at this stage, at the bare minimum, having firewall and antivirus. We've already spoken about the limitations of antivirus, okay? But you shouldn't really only have those 2 technologies, okay? Because they will give you the bare minimum of security. So when we talk about your firewall, we want to, with the home analogy, your firewall will be effectively your front door and your lock will be effectively your antivirus, okay? Now, if we start going ahead and talking about adding additional elements, okay, we're going to be talking about your glass break sensors for your home, your CCTV cameras, your alarm systems, and your humans, okay? And your humans could be your neighbor, okay? It could be, you know, let's say, for example, a neighborhood watch, all right? So all of those elements will allow additional layers. So if something does fail, maybe the alarm fails, but the neighbor saw something, hey, that's just as good for me. I know that there's something going on then, okay? So if we compare that to technologies, okay, you have your EDRs, your endpoint detection and response. You have your SIEM solution. So maybe something didn't happen from an endpoint level, but it did happen from a cloud perspective, maybe your Azure infrastructure. We will be able to see that with a SIEM solution because we're ingesting those logs from those particular applications, okay? Then you have effectively your security operations center, your SOC team that will layer on completely on top of all those particular technologies. So if something does happen, there is going to be a SOC team that's going to be able to respond to it. There is going to be that emergency response, the police for your house, effectively. And if something does occur, there is somebody that's going to be able to deal with that and triage and finally respond if needed. Okay, and then work with your partner and escalate further whenever necessary. But you have the resources. You have over 200 people within that SOC team. Okay, you have the correct technology by utilizing the EDRs, the SIEMs, etc., whatever you're incorporating with that. And then finally, we have the correct process, which really does help me with my next slide, which again are the people, the process, and finally the technology. Having those 3 completely helps you with reducing your risk as much as possible by having the correct people behind the technology itself, and then finally a bulletproof or solid process, should we say. Okay. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and just see if there's any questions that I can help with.
I'm not sure if you've answered this, but the question did come up just a couple of slides ago, and that is what is the advantage of having multi-layers in security, which I think you've answered, but perhaps just to recap on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So it was mentioned at towards the start. So if I only had my, let's say, our EDR technology, okay, and EDR's again endpoint detection and response, so it focuses on the endpoint. We don't want to rely just on the EDR for something that a threat that could occur, because what happens if the EDR for some reason didn't detect it, okay, and we'll be none the wiser. So as I talked about my house, if my alarm didn't be able to detect that someone was going into the house, I have my neighbor, should I say, or I have something outside, which could be maybe not my alarm, but maybe my CCTV cameras, okay, would be able to see something. So if we talk about adding another layer, which could be going ahead and talk about our SIEM solution, we now have 2 layers of security. So if something isn't detected from an endpoint layer level, there's a higher chance that it will be detected from a, let's say, a cloud level, okay? Maybe someone's compromised my O365 account and they're doing impossible travel. Maybe they're logging in outside of the EU. I have alerts coming up from that perspective, okay? Now, if you talk about from an EDR perspective, maybe they didn't compromise anything from the actual endpoint layer, or level, should I say, but they did compromise something from an account level, okay? Your EDR may not pick that up, depending on if they've actually got access to the endpoints, okay? But your SIEM solution will pick that up because they can see something which is an indicator of compromise. That's why it's so important not to rely on one, not to rely on two, but multiple layers of security, which will increase your chances of detecting something and decrease your risk, your overall cybersecurity risk. So great question.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's it, isn't it? Putting those layers in to capture as much as possible. Not one thing can do everything. And I think
Right.
as those compromises become more complicated, more difficult, solutions like this are just, you know, they're growing in requirement. And like, I think just to kind of go back to the start of where I said, you know, it's tomorrow's security. I think it's today's security, not tomorrow's, is probably the way of thinking about it. And I think time to reflect on what do you have in place now? Is it really the same as what you had 10 years ago? And yes, it might have had updated versions. I think we all need to start thinking with a real thought of, is that sufficient now?
Yeah, I agree.
And
I
I
agree.
think that's hopefully what today has given you an insight to. I think we haven't got any other questions at this stage. I think at this point, I'd like to thank Sasha and Connectwise for doing that. I think it was a real good insight. If you have any questions, obviously reach out to us at EBS. You can email hello@ebs.tech. As I said, this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, where there's also various other videos and content about security, as well as other elements that we cover. So I think at that point, thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care.